Imagine you are finally back home after living abroad, but upon returning, everything seems a bit strange, familiar yet different. The things you were used to suddenly seem exaggerated, confusing, or simply different. It's as if Brazil has changed, or maybe it's you who has changed. From gigantic supermarkets to the need for a car for every errand, from the healthcare system to tipping, returning to Brazil after living in the United States can be a reverse culture shock. In today's video, we'll explore 10 differences that might surprise you upon your return to Brazil. Some are funny, some are a bit scary, and many will make you reflect on how different life is in each country. Ready to see Brazil with new eyes? First off, the shock of walking into a supermarket, the crazy amount of everything. Stepping into a supermarket in the United States after living in Europe can be a totally overwhelming experience. What once seemed normal suddenly seems over the top. The aisles are huge, the variety is massive, and the number of choices for every single product is just endless. For those used to the smaller, quality-focused selection of European supermarkets, the difference is obvious. In Europe, supermarkets tend to be smaller and offer a more limited selection. It's easy to find fresh bread, local produce, and organic options without having to walk for miles around the store. In the United States, on the other hand, supermarkets are gigantic, with entire aisles dedicated to a single product category. While in Europe you can find a few types of cereal, the cereal aisle in the United States looks like a maze, with dozens of varieties, sizes, and flavors. The same goes for dairy, snacks, drinks, you name it. It's easy to get lost in the sea of options. Even a quick grocery run can turn into an endless expedition. At first, it can even be fun to have so many choices. But over time, it gets tiring. Those who have lived in a place where grocery shopping was simpler and more straightforward might find the overdose of options in American supermarkets a little hard to swallow. Okay, second point, the extreme reliance on cars. One of the biggest differences when coming back to the US after living in Europe is the absolute need for a car. In many European cities, getting around without a car is a piece of cake, thanks to a well-designed infrastructure that prioritizes public transport, bikes, and pedestrian areas. But in the United States, especially outside of big cities, a car isn't just a convenience. It's a necessity for a functional life. American cities are designed for cars, which means that the distances between important places are much greater. Even something as simple as buying bread or grabbing a coffee can mean having to drive for miles. Many areas lack sidewalks, and public transport options are limited or non-existent. In some places, it can even be dangerous to walk, even if your destination is relatively close, because the roads are designed only for cars. For those who have become accustomed to the convenience of trains, trams, or bikes in Europe, this dependence on cars can be frustrating. In addition to the cost of gas, maintenance, and insurance, the time spent driving can also be exhausting. It's not uncommon for people to spend hours in traffic every day, which is not as common in many European cities. The idea of being able to simply leave your house and walk or bike anywhere without worrying about parking or gas is something that many people miss when they come back. In third place, the craziness of prices and hidden taxes. What strikes those who return from Europe to the United States is the difficulty at the time of payment. In most European countries, the price you see is the price you pay, without surprises or absurd bills at the checkout. While in the United States, the price on the tag is never the final price. Taxes are only added at the end and vary from state to state, city to city, and even product to product. This lack of transparency is a source of confusion and frustration. Even buying a coffee becomes a lottery because the final price depends on the local tax. Moreover, some products are tax exempt in some states, but not in others. Basic foodstuffs, for example, may be tax exempt in some places, but not in others. In other words, you have to pay much more attention when you go to the supermarket in the United States. In addition to taxes, prices in general can be frighteningly higher than in Europe. Things like bread, fresh produce, or organic food can be much more expensive. In Europe, supermarket chains generally offer affordable and good quality options, without having to sell an arm and a leg to do your shopping. In the United States, quality is often linked to expensive brands, so the consumer has to choose between spending more or settling for ultra-processed products. This difference makes everyday shopping much more complicated and unpredictable. For those who are used to the simplicity of European prices, returning to the American system can be an eternal source of frustration. Fourth point, tipping culture, a real social minefield. If there's one thing that can send shivers down your spine when returning to the United States, it's the tipping system. In Europe, tipping is optional and symbolic. If the service is good, you can leave a little extra, but it's not mandatory or systematically expected. In the United States, on the other hand, tipping is an integral part of the payment system, and not adhering to this practice can be seen as an offense. At a restaurant, at least 20% is expected, but tipping is not limited to restaurants. You're expected to tip in taxis, bars, beauty salons for home deliveries, and even in some places where you've been poorly served. Even electronic payment terminals display tip options from 15 to 30%, which can turn a simple purchase like a coffee into a real dilemma. The most worrying thing is that tipping is not just a gesture of courtesy. Many workers depend on it to supplement their wages. In the United States, the minimum wage for service workers is generally extremely low, which forces them to depend on customer tips to receive a decent salary. This makes the act of tipping a kind of social obligation rather than a gesture of sincere gratitude. For those returning from Europe, where workers receive a fair wage and tips are not essential, this system can seem unfair and confusing. Instead of enjoying a meal or coffee in peace, customers in the United States have to constantly calculate how much to tip, if they are giving too much or too little, and if their decision will influence how others see them. It's a small detail that becomes an unexpected stress factor in everyday life. Number 5. Eating out. But why all the rush? One of the most obvious differences between the dining experience in Europe and the United States is the pace of the meal. In many European countries, eating out is a relaxing experience. It's not just about feeding yourself, but about enjoying the moment, having a nice chat, and savoring every bite. In the United States, however, the food culture is very different. As soon as you sit down at the table, the service is quick and efficient. The waiter is there in seconds, shows up with an almost mechanical smile, and rattles off a list of options and recommendations before you even have a chance to look at the menu. You don't even have time to start eating before the waiter comes back to ask if everything is okay, if you need anything else, or if you want to order dessert already. But the most annoying thing is how quickly the bill arrives. In Europe, waiters usually wait for you to ask for the bill so you can stay at the table for as long as you like. In the United States, the bill often arrives before you've even finished eating, as if to say, it's time to go. This efficiency can be practical in some situations, but it can also make the dining experience feel rushed and less enjoyable. For those used to enjoying a meal in peace, the fast pace of American restaurants can be hard to stomach. It's not just about the food itself, but the whole atmosphere, which favors turnover and efficiency at the expense of the experience. Eating out ceases to be a moment of pleasure and relaxation, and becomes a transaction that must be concluded as quickly as possible. Number 6. Conversations with strangers everywhere. One of the first things you notice when you come back to the United States is how many casual social interactions there are throughout the day. In Europe, people tend to be more reserved. Conversations with strangers aren't as common, and shop assistants or waiters usually just stick to the essentials. In the United States, on the other hand, small talk is everywhere. As soon as you walk into a store, the cashier greets you with a, "How are you?" And they might even ask you about your day, your family, or any random topic. In line, it's normal for a stranger to comment on the weather, the product you're holding, or anything else that could start a conversation. For some, this friendliness and openness can be refreshing, but for those who have lived in Europe and gotten used to a more distant approach, it can be a bit strange. Sometimes you just don't feel like talking, but in the United States, refusing a conversation can seem rude or unfriendly. This difference in social interaction reflects the culture of the two places. In the United States, there's a tendency to make quick connections, even if they're superficial. In Europe, on the other hand, even if interactions are generally more reserved, when relationships do develop, they tend to be deeper. 7th culture shock. Extreme indoor temperatures. The climate inside American homes and buildings is another culture shock that can be unpleasant for those who have lived in Europe. In many parts of Europe, heating is generally more moderate, using radiators or underfloor heating, while air conditioning is not common in most homes. In the United States, however, central air conditioning is the norm, which means that both heating in winter and cooling in summer are often excessive. In winter, many American homes and offices are so warm that the feeling of dry skin is unavoidable. Central heating blows hot air into rooms all the time, drying out your skin, throat, and eyes. In some places, the indoor temperature can be so high that people wear light clothes at home while it's cold outside. This drastic difference can be hard to bear for those used to more natural temperatures in Europe, where it's common to open windows for ventilation, even in winter, and summer is no different. In Europe, homes and offices tend to use more traditional methods to cool down, like shutters, fans, or simply opening the windows. In the United States, air conditioning is present in almost every building and is often overused. It's not uncommon to walk into a restaurant or store in the middle of summer and feel like you're walking into a freezer. Many people end up wearing jackets or sweaters even on warm days just to endure the freezing temperature inside. For those returning from Europe, this dependence on artificial air conditioning can be annoying. The feeling of living in a climate-controlled environment without the possibility of opening a window for fresh air can make adapting to these extreme conditions even more difficult. Eighth, the healthcare system, a constant worry. One of the biggest difficulties for those who return to live in the United States after a period in Europe is getting used to the difference in the healthcare system. In most European countries, healthcare is accessible, transparent, and in many cases, free or at least affordable. In the United States, however, healthcare is a business, and every medical visit can turn into an anxious experience, not only because of concern for one's health, but also because of the cost it may have. One of the biggest worries for those returning to the United States is that when faced with a health problem, the first thought is not, how will I get better, but rather, how much will it cost me? Even with health insurance, out-of-pocket expenses, deductibles, and co-pays can turn any medical visit into a financial headache. Without insurance, even a simple visit can cost hundreds of dollars, and a hospital stay can result in a bill of thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars. As if that weren't enough, medical bills in the United States often arrive weeks or months after the visit, generally divided into multiple charges from different providers, one for the doctor, another for the lab tests, and yet another for the hospital. Figuring out exactly how much you have to pay and why can become a huge bureaucratic undertaking. This system is completely different from the European one, where healthcare costs are much more predictable and access to care does not depend on one's income. Returning to the United States means facing the fear of getting sick again, not only because of the consequences for one's health, but also because of the financial burden it can bring. Number 9. Where's the outdoor life? One thing you notice right away when you come back to the United States is the difference in how public spaces are used. In a lot of European cities, social life happens in plazas, parks, and at tables outside of cafes. People spend a lot of time walking around, enjoying the urban spaces and hanging out in cafes or on benches. But in the US, a big part of social life happens indoors, like in malls, restaurants, or at home. This is partly because of how a lot of American cities are designed. Pedestrian areas are limited, and in many places, there just aren't inviting public spaces to meet up with friends. While in Europe, it's totally normal to meet friends in a plaza or at a cafe with outdoor seating. In the United States, get-togethers usually happen at home or in private spaces. For those who've gotten used to that community atmosphere and outdoor life of many European cities, the feeling that in the US everything is set up for staying indoors can be discouraging. The lack of casual encounters on the street and the reliance on cars to get around contribute to making life in the US more isolating and less spontaneous. Number 10. Culture shock and lifestyle differences. Besides all the differences in infrastructure, services, and consumer culture, it's the difference in mentality and life philosophy that really causes reverse culture shock between Europe and the United States. In Europe, life tends to be more balanced. There's a lot of importance placed on free time, rest, and overall quality of life. Vacations are longer, workdays are less intense, and the mentality is more focused on enjoying the simple things in life. In the United States, on the other hand, the mentality of productivity and efficiency prevails. Everything is fast-paced, from work to consumption to leisure time. This fast pace can be exciting, but also overwhelming for those used to a quieter life. Success in the United States is often measured by performance and material possessions, while in Europe, more value is placed on work-life balance. Despite all these differences, each system has its advantages and disadvantages. In Europe, life can be more peaceful, but sometimes also less dynamic. In the United States, there are more opportunities and energy, but often at the expense of quality of life. For those experiencing reverse culture shock, the key is to find a middle ground and enjoy the best of both worlds. Living in another country changes how we see the world. And when we come back, we realize we don't quite fit into the life we once called home. Reverse culture shock is not just about readjusting, but understanding and embracing the best of both worlds. Europe teaches us to appreciate balance and quality of life, while the United States infects us with its energy and drive. Which style do you identify with more? What aspect of Europe would you bring to Brazil or vice versa? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to the channel for more content about life abroad. Goodbye.